Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome to Homeschool Together. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to have a lot of links with the interview today down below. Make sure you take a time to do that. Check that out. Also, check out our Gumroad page with our Build Your Library and Torchlight combination. All of our YouTube videos that we've put out on our YouTube. If you guys are thinking about doing that and going around the world, we have those resource guides there as well for you guys. If you have a chance.
Please subscribe to the podcast.
Subscribe to the podcast. So we think there's some black box voodoo thing with subscriptions. So if you're sitting there and going, hey, these guys are really cool. I downloaded 20 of their podcasts. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Arrow and I very much appreciate it. But also hit the subscribe button because I think that's where we move up the rankings.
And please leave us a review on iTunes.
Yes,
I know that's something that we ask for every week, but we really love getting your feedback and,
leave comments on our YouTube channel. We love listening to you guys.
We do. We love responding. And we're here to help. So if there's something that you have a specific question about or that we've done or talked about, or you're just having a struggle in your homeschool and you want to reach out, we'd love to help if we can. So we're here for you to support you.
Ariel, I've opened up an Excel sheet. I'd like to go around the world and become a world schooler.
Right. We've been talking about this the last hour after we finished our interview with Alyson from worldtravelfamily.com. So
we don't go around the world, but I'd at least like to see every state in the U.S.
We have dreams. We have dreams.
Small dreams.
We spoke with Alyson just a little while ago. She's based in Australia, and it was so fun to talk to her. Mm-hmm. She and her family traveled around the world for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, maybe even longer than that.
I thought it was like 6 or 7 years before the pandemic, and she just had a wealth of information. She got both of us just thinking about wow, how could you, travel and see all these great places and have your kids have these experiences. And homeschool during it. And it was amazing. And her site is awesome. You will definitely lose hours on her site. It's really great. It's not only about how to travel frugally, how to travel with kids, homeschool those kids while you're traveling, but what to do in these different locations. Mm-hmm. They've been all over the world and had some just incredible adventures. I'm just I think about what her kids must be able to say now that they're, teens, as they reach into their adulthood and the stories that they can tell, right? About all the places that they've been, the things that they have seen, they've been to the base camp at Everest, right? Who can say that, when you're in your teens that you've done that. So I think that that's a pretty amazing thing. And I love hearing from her firsthand.
Well, and she's wonderful. She a million words a minute, tons of information.
Oh my gosh, there's so much here. I want to listen to this again after you edit it, just because I want to hear all of
a ton of stories.
The things again.
Living in Romania for a couple of years,
oh, man,
using home bases,
cool.
And I mean, just
going to Angkor Wat, staying in Vietnam, and then
going to the U.S., driving across the U.S., going to the U.K. It's just. She talked a lot of great experiences, a lot of great stories, and a lot of what it took for her and her family to be able to make that leap, and hopefully that can inspire you. I know we've done back-to-back road schooling and then a little bit of world schooling.
Yeah.
Really trying to inspire you guys as we get into the school year to second guess yourself and maybe turn around and get that old VW bus and hit the road and go.
Yeah, or grab
travel.
your airline tickets.
Or, get yourself prepared for next summer when you guys want to go and see all the great national parks or go, see the fall foliage in Vermont or New Hampshire.
Yes, or go visit Thailand.
And
I mean,
it's all there.
At one point she talks about her kids being really into ancient civilizations and wanting to go to Greece, and then they went to Egypt so they could see that. And I'm like, our daughter's head would explode if we told her,
explode.
we could go and just see the pyramids. She's been asking us since she was 5 when we can go to Egypt to see the pyramids. And it, for us, it just seems so unobtainable to travel like that. I'm on that kind of scale. And how do you leave things behind? And even for a short trip, how do you make that all work? I love talking with Alyson because everything she talked about made it sound so accessible.
It did.
I mean, obviously there is the time to do it and the money to do it, but she's got lots of great tips on her site about how to do things frugally. And just when you kind of pare it down and think about what you really need, it's not as much as you think. It was really great. It definitely opened my eyes to maybe how we could get our kids some world travel experience, and those. Put
away our trip to Spain, Ariel. Forget about that.
Well, she was only a year and a half, so it was really, that trip was for us. She was just a toddler tag along, but for them to have these experiences, to learn about something, and then to go to this place and have these just rich, cultural connections, I just think is amazing. So we love talking with Alyson. We hope that you enjoy her interview. It was absolutely fantastic. And hopefully it gives you a little bit of the travel bug and you think about where you can go with your family next. So here we are with Alyson. Hi, Alyson. Thanks so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you.
Hello. It's nice to be here.
So can you give us and our listeners a little bit of background about you and your family and what drove you all to start homeschooling?
Okay. So my name's Alyson and I'm married to my husband, who is Australian. I'm actually from Wales originally. We have 2 boys and we've homeschooled mostly throughout most of their school years. My youngest son has never been to school at all. My eldest son went to school very briefly when, year 1, some of year 2, I think that was when we pulled him out. And then we decided to take them traveling. So we took them traveling for 6-7 years. And then because of the pandemic and the lockdowns and all that, we ended up coming back to Australia, where we originally owned a home before we left. And we had to finish off their education here from bricks and mortar because obviously we just couldn't go anywhere. Australia's borders were closed. So what we did at that point was we enrolled them in an online school because the legalities in Australia, it was all just very complex. So we enrolled them in an online school for the last 2 years of maybe 3 years of their formal education. And now we're done. They finished. Education is officially over. So we went from in school very briefly to homeschooling, to unschooling, to world schooling, then to an online school. We've now wrapped it all up. We've finished.
Wow, you've run the gamut. So what was it originally that drew your family to start homeschooling with your boys?
Well, honestly, I never really wanted to send him to school. I didn't want him to go to daycare, most certainly. I wanted to raise my kids myself. But when you start going to the playgroups with the other mums and you make friends with them and their kids are going to school, and you think, well, they should go with this little peer group that they've established. And, my friends are doing this, I should do this. And honestly, peer pressure made me put the elder one in school. I was never particularly happy with that arrangement. I hated it. I didn't like him not being home. I remember bursting into tears a few times. He kind of adapted okay. He settled in. He wasn't particularly unhappy, but it wasn't working as well as you would have hoped. I couldn't see that he was getting much out of it. He wasn't really learning much. He wasn't particularly having a great time. He was okay, but I think he would have rather been at home. My youngest son was obviously still at home at that point, and we were having fun, myself and the little one, and we wanted him with us. And all through this time, I was thinking, should I homeschool? Because I always kind of wanted to, but never had the courage. And then I think something happened in school that upset me, and I just marched in one day and pulled him out. And we took it from there. So as most people do, I started very school at home. We were going to sit at the kitchen table and do times tables and all the, the formal homeschooling, which turned out to be a complete non-starter. We learned that very fast. And then we just found our way over the years. Obviously, I've done this for a lot of years. Yeah. He towers above me now. So along the way, you find what works for the different ages. Different things suit different types of children and different ages of children. And you just find your way. But what certainly struck me was how much he flourished once I pulled him out of school. in terms of learning and himself and his confidence and his happiness. I'd had my little boy back rather than this fairly sort of stressed. He wasn't unhappy, but he was kind of stressed and just wasn't himself, and being forced to have to do that homework in the evenings. So that meant our family time in the evenings was stressed because he didn't want to read those graded readers. So it was just, everyone was happier once we started. So we stuck with it and then we took it on the road.
So when you said that you guys were in the UK, in the US, we have kind of a patchwork quilt of regulations and rules around homeschooling. I think you're one of the first people we've talked with outside of the US. What were the legal implications of homeschooling in the UK? Maybe talk a little bit about, like, is it the same? I mean, what did you have to go through to, start homeschooling?
Well, we actually started in Australia.
Oh,
but
okay.
I'll tell you about the UK. This was all in Australia. We moved to Australia when the boys were, I think, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Okay. In the UK, the regulations are fantastic. There basically is no regulation. There's no registration. There's no assessment. There's nothing, basically. The default is that the parent educates their child. And if the parent wishes to, they can outsource that education to a school. And that's actually the same way in Australia. A lot of people don't realise that. In Australia, it's much more regulated, but it goes state by state. Some states are harder than others. We were in Queensland. It's actually one of the easier states. So we had to apply. I had to send off a letter asking if I could homeschool along with some sort of learning plan. I was approved. Most people are approved. And then at the end of each year, you have to submit some work samples and sort of a document of summing up what you've done that year. And what they're actually trying to assess, they're not assessing the child and the child's attainments. They're assessing you as an educator to see if you're recognizing what you could do to help the child better or where you should be going. And they're checking that you've actually read. You're supposed to adhere to the state national curriculum. They want you to show that you know what's in that and that you have a pathway that will ensure that child will basically do what the kids in school do. So there's leeway in that you can do a lot of other stuff as well, but they want you pretty much to adhere to the local curriculum.
Was that local curriculum something that they gave to you and you just followed and you bought the books and you did everything? Or
no.
Okay.
No, sorry, no. You just look it up online. The school curriculum. It's not learning materials. It's not worksheets or things to read. It's like a progression of learning. It's what.
Standards.
Yeah, just like a standard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's outcomes and it's so long since I've read one of these. It's written in teacherese. It's quite difficult to understand. But I was lucky in that I did have a lot of friends at that time who were teachers and who were homeschooling their own children. That's incredibly common here. And we had an online group where we could all sort of bounce ideas off each other and pick each other's brains and translate this. And we found all the best ways to get around all this paperwork and do it so that we would be approved, so that everything would look fantastic and we'd have no issues. And those groups are actually great. If you're new to this, it's fantastic. You can get all this help and advice from people who've done it for years, many of whom are teachers, and understand the language because it's very complex. But the actual curriculum itself, when you look at it online, you see how little in terms of things that the kids learn in each term or each year, how actually little there is. And you can bash that out in a day or two if you have to. I'm sure you've found the same.
Yeah. It sounds actually very similar to what we encounter on a daily basis. So, know, when you started doing that homeschooling in Australia, and you looked at the standards and everything, did you end up going and researching curriculum and workbooks and things of that nature? Like,
no.
You didn't do any of that?
Not really. I read all this online documentation about what was actually going to be, how the schools were going to work. And it's not just what they're going to learn, it's personal development as well. So like the first term, I remember the first term of year 2 or whatever it was, the whole term was taken up with what is a family, which is not, I can cover that in half an hour. all different types of family. It's in one. Not in a schoolroom. Well, I don't actually see any families happening there, but no, I bought a few books, things like maths books, the workbooks that actually were the same ones that the kids used in school. We can buy those easily at the shops here. We used some of those to start with, and then we progressed to various online programs. There was Reading Egg, Study Ladder, Khan Academy, XML maths, something like that. There's all sorts of these online different learning programs that we used, and we could dip in and out of depending on what sort of mood everyone was in and what we felt like doing today and what we were struggling with and what was interesting. So there was all that sort of stuff. So for those first 2 years when we were still in Australia and we were having to do all these reports and learning plans and so on, yes, we did. We had to pay attention to that. We really had to, because otherwise there's no way I could do the paperwork. And the paperwork would take me, it would take a month out of my life each time. It was, particularly by the time I had 2 of them in the system, it would be a month of writing up reports and trying to get the kids to make some sort of written work that I could submit. You had to do 2 samples in 3 subjects, a before and an after. And then I, as the educator, had to show that I knew where the child had improved or where they needed more help. So it was you kind of had to make the work to suit what they wanted, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And we found ways to do that. And all the mums are asking each other questions. How can I make this work? How can I use Lego to demonstrate this? Things like that. We all got through it.
So when you started homeschooling, did you have some educational experience, or was this something new? And did you have any, was it a challenge to become an educator, to your children? Okay.
I mean, I've got a degree in biological sciences and half a master's. And no, it's very, very easy, low standard stuff. I mean, I started when my eldest son was starting to do biology A-level, and biology is my subject, obviously. And I was starting to really scratch my head at some of that. I just couldn't remember a lot of it. But no, the basic stuff at the beginning, it's so straightforward. Some of the maths that they did as they got older. At one point we had my younger son, they both did maths online for the last 2 years. And some of the maths I'd never seen before. It wasn't on the curriculum when I was at school. And also some of the things they learnt in English and English Lit. It was in the way that they structure paragraphs and the way that they're required to answer questions. That wasn't taught when I was at school. And it's very formulaic just to pass an exam. I'd never come across most of this stuff. You've probably come across Peel paragraphs and all this sort of stuff. I'd never come across it before. I think it's not something you would ever use in real life. I make a living as a writer and I would never use it. And I remember watching his English teacher one day, but the topic on the one day was, how do you write a blog post? And I'm just sitting there, like, we're both laughing in hysterics because she had no clue. And at one point he actually said, my mum's a professional blogger. And she was like, oh. She had no idea. I make a living doing this stuff. And she was required to teach a child something that she had no actual knowledge of, which just makes a mockery of everything. She's lovely. I'm still in touch with her. She's a lovely woman, but she didn't know how to teach that. It was ridiculous. But yeah, certain things, no, I did not know. Some maths and some weird stuff they use in English exams to get full marks. You have to do it in this particular way, which I would never use. It's not something people really use in the real world. There you go.
So transitioning from homeschooling, you guys then, embarked on this grand journey around the world at Worldschooling. Can you talk a little bit about like what that is and what you guys started doing?
Well, we were, as I said before, at this point we were in Australia, and I think we'd been homeschooling the boys probably about 2 years. And we'd found our groove. We could see how it was working and not working. And the biggest thing I could see was that they were learning from what was around them, be that standing in the rainforest, being out on the Great Barrier Reef, talking to people, what they watched on TV, what books they were reading. They were learning from that, not what I was wanting them to learn from any sort of text or lesson, or which I wasn't giving them anyway. Most of their learning, I find, for me, has come through conversation. So the more time I can spend with them without any distractions, the better. And at one point we took the boys to Everest Base Camp. So we had 3 weeks of walking and talking. And the amount of learning that goes on when you just talk to a child for 3 weeks with no phones, no washing up, that's when the real learning happens, I think. And also through experiences and seeing things. And we could see this was what they were learning, because we live in a very isolated spot. As I said, we're on the Great Barrier Reef, but we are very, very isolated. Our nearest very, very small museum is probably about 6 hours away. Wow. And I'm a Londoner. And I was pining for the Natural History Museum, the Science Museum, the V&A, all the historic stuff in London. I was just pining for that. I wanted to take my kids there. So I did take them there. We popped off, just the boys and myself. We actually went without my husband, went back to London, took them to all the fantastic stuff I wanted to show them in London, showed them around Wales, my home, their ancestral home. And then we actually popped over to the States and I took them to Disney, because Disney's a fantastic learning opportunity as well. So we did that and we had just such a fabulous time. We got back and we were like, we don't want to stay here. We want to hit the road. And at this point, my husband was at the top of the tree. He was executive chef at a resort here. There was nowhere higher he could go. Our house was full of furniture that we brought with us from the UK that was getting pretty old, and we were thinking about replacing it. And we had nothing, no reason to stay there. There was nothing holding us back. There was no career obligations. There was no, we really love this house. We didn't. We had no close family or friends because we were new in town still. We'd only been there a few years. There was nothing holding us there. And my husband and I had previously, when we were younger, before we were married, we'd done a 12-month RTW, round the world trip, just the two of us. So we knew what it was like. We knew the lifestyle. We knew how much we could cram in. We knew what it would cost. We knew exactly what to expect in terms of accommodation, getting around. And we knew that we could do it with the kids, and we knew that the kids would get loads out of it, because I knew how much they'd gotten out of just seeing London and Orlando, etc. Yeah, so we liked the idea of the freedom. We liked the idea of spending more time together as a family, because I've just said my husband was a chef. Do you know how horrendous chef's hours are? Oh, yeah. It was dreadful.
Yes. His mother was a chef.
My mom was.
Yeah, and his sister. So we know.
Yeah, you know it then. Because he was at a big resort hotel, he'd work Christmas Day every year. And that's no fun with little kids. It's dreadful, actually. It's really shocking that people expect workers to do that. Mm-hmm. So we had no love lost for his career. Yeah, we wanted to spend more time together. We wanted to show the kids the world. We wanted them to see stuff firsthand rather than learning it from a book. We wanted to have more fun. And we knew that educationally, we thought it was going to be the best thing for them educationally, in terms of academic education and also in terms of personal development. They're going to do some really cool stuff, push themselves. There's going to be some big challenges. And yeah, that was our decision made. So we sold a lot of stuff, like the furniture that we no longer needed. We put a lot of stuff in storage in the loft, just personal items, some clothes, etc. My husband quit his job, sold the car, and we just left. I got a one-way ticket to Kuala Lumpur, just the boys and I at first, because my husband had to stay at home just to get rid of the last few bits and pieces. The car went at the last minute, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So the boys and I left. We went to Kuala Lumpur. We had a little bit of time there. Then we went up to Bangkok, and my husband joined us in Bangkok. And I still remember we were sitting on the Khao San Road having dinner, and my husband comes along with his backpack and a big grin on his face, really happy to be on the road with us finally, freedom. But yeah, it was fantastic. So we just travelled around. We made it up as we went along. We never had any plan that we were going to go to any particular set place at a particular set time. We just sort of went wherever suited us. And that carried on for about 7 years.
Wow.
Did you start with a plan? Like, did you say, okay, this is just going to go for like 6 months, maybe a year, and then just kind of drag down on? Okay.
Well, we only had we saved. With the first month, we funded on savings, and we thought we had enough money for probably 2 years if we stayed in Southeast Asia, because it's really cheap. Yeah. But we only stayed probably about 8 months in Southeast Asia, and then we flew to the UK because my mum was sick, and we went to the UK. Spent a lot of money in the UK because the UK is really expensive. And then we got on a cruise ship from Southampton to New York, which is actually cheaper than flying. And you get 10 days of free food and accommodation. So then we did a massive road trip from Canada to the Keys, which was cool. It was awesome. And then we hopped down to El Salvador and Guatemala. And then we got on a cruise ship from Florida, Fort Lauderdale, back to Barcelona. So you can imagine at this point that we had spent slightly more than we would have done in Southeast Asia. So we actually ran out of the savings within the first year. So then we based ourselves in London for I think it was about 10 months. And my husband managed to get temping work as a chef in the city. he racked up loads of savings that way. I worked really hard on the website. By that point, the website was earning. And after that year, really, the website just grew and grew and grew. Mm-hmm. And financially, we were fine. We could just continue. We could have continued forever had it not been for what happened in 2020 when the whole world came tumbling down on our heads. But yeah.
So when you first set out, you talked about all of these advantages of your boys getting this just truly global cultural experience, learning in person instead of reading about it. What other disadvantages did you weigh when you were thinking about, this as uprooting them, or, was there anything that gave you pause about starting this journey?
Not even one tiny thing, to be honest. Nothing. No, we had no roots at all where we were because we hadn't been there very long. So all I saw in terms of family and friends was positive, because we could go home to the UK and they could see their grandparents and all my friends and so on. No, nothing. I just thought it would be really, really good for them because we're in an isolated small town with a very small population, a climate that we were just talking before. It is always hot here. They've never seen snow or frost or winter or, I thought it'd be really good for them to experience other ways of living. Just the whole world. I mean, it's beautiful here, but it is very limited. And we're just a long way from everything. Really, really long way. So yeah, only positives, absolutely only positives. The only thing that was a worry was money. Were we going to be able to finance it? We did very well with the saving. So that was a big relief that we actually pulled that off very, very well. We saved, in 12 months, we saved enough that we thought was going to last us 2 years. We sold a lot of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, just a quick question about, you're doing the homeschooling and you were talking about how, challenging it was to maintain the standards or the reporting for the Australia regulations. All of a sudden now you're leaving the country. Was there any tether to Australia that you had to continue to reporting, or are you just saying, I don't exist, you don't know who I am?
Well, it was funny because I kind of thought that because I was registered, I would continue to be registered in Australia. So I remember emailing them one day saying, is it okay if I submit my report by email? Because obviously it's difficult for me to post it because I'm in India. And they said, why are you doing it? Why are you doing it from India? And they said, well, no, you can't be registered in Australia if you're not in Australia. So that came as a surprise to me. Okay. So from that point, I was like, well, we're not Australian anymore. We're British. I mean, we've all got British passports anyway. Sure. So we just reverted to being British. And if you're in a country as a tourist, not a resident, the local laws don't apply to you. So I was just British the whole time. And we actually switched formally to the British curriculum, not in a strict way, but in the way that if we were to sit exams, we were going to sit the British exams, which we eventually did. The British curriculum is very different to the Australian curriculum. Obviously different subjects. Things like maths will be fairly similar. But if you look at a subject like history, the topics taught are completely different. Yeah. So yeah, we went towards the British side. Okay. I was free of Australia the moment we left, which I didn't even realise. But they told me I was. Yeah.
Well, that was a big question. Like I was wondering, like once you get it, kind of this international individual, like where do you get tethered to? And because we know a lot of times with homeschooling, the biggest thing that we always, a lot of people worry about outside of educating our children, socialization, all that stuff, is what rules do we have to follow? And
Yeah.
It's like when you become and we're waiting to interview. We joked we want to interview our space schooler, and we can't wait maybe next 20 years or something. What international rules do you adhere to homeschooling in Mars?
Yeah, local.
Local rules. So okay, so you guys have sold everything.
Not everything. We didn't sell the house.
The car, but everything. Yeah, all the things. And you guys head out. Okay, so now you're doing schooling on the road. What does that look like when you're going from Kuala Lumpur to Bangkok to India and you're to the States? You got a bag? You got your homeschool bag that you take with us?
I mean, how do you downsize your gear?
Yeah.
We're very relaxed, shall we say. Cool. It depends what you're doing. If you're very actively traveling around, so say, for instance, we're on a whistle-top tour of India, traveling by train, staying 1 or 2 nights here and there, you haven't got time to do much. And there's no need to do much because look what the kids are doing. Look what they're, absorbing around them. if we're in one place for an extended period, so for instance, that period when we were in Kuala Lumpur and it was just the three of us, we did do a lot of sightseeing. Because my husband wasn't there was also a lot of time when we just stayed in the hotel, just the three of us. And what we did have in our backpacks was, of course, computers. So we had all those online programs we'd previously been using. And I always tried to have 1 or 2 workbooks each for the kids. So it might be a science workbook, but in a science workbook, you've got to write sentences and you've got to do spelling, you've got to do handwriting, and there's some maths. So one workbook can cover a multitude of different things if you just want the kids to do something academic on that day, just to keep them busy. Or we might just buy a book of crosswords or puzzles of some sort, word searches. They liked word searches. We never did journaling. Everyone says, oh, you must do journaling. My kids hated journaling. They would not journal. They had no interest. Just didn't see the point, didn't want to do it, tried it. No, just was never going to happen. So journaling was not ever going to be a thing.
Even with their mom as a blogger, they just never no interest.
They never liked writing. They never liked holding a pen or pencil. When my younger one, I think we were in Guatemala, and we're actually in Antigua, Guatemala for a month in one place. So we actually had that quiet time where we actually did a fair amount. We're in Guatemala. I think he must have been about 8. And I set him up with his own website, and he could make his own blog post. And he actually got quite into that. And he was writing about the different animals we'd seen and things like that. But he actually couldn't really formally read and write at that stage. He had to have a lot of help. But what he really loved was seeing the number of visitors that had been to his page and seeing his comments. Of course, everyone was supporting him because he's a little kid. Yeah, sure. He loved the feedback and seeing the numbers go up, and he was really motivated by that. He's really motivated. He does YouTube today. He is still really motivated by getting that numerical following thing happening, you know?
Yeah.
He loves that. That's just, you've got to find their currency. And that was his. He also loves money. He's going to be rich. He's going to be another Richard Branson. Whereas my other son was a reader. He always had his nose in a book. And so when you're on a long train ride, flight, bus ride, whatever, he had his nose in a book, and he read and he read and he read. And that's where a big chunk of his literacy came from. He read a lot of historical stuff. He's really, really interested in ancient history. Rick Riordan, I'm sure you know Rick Riordan. I love that man for writing those books. Fantastic. Yep. And then he got onto the classical Greek literature. He loved that. He requested that we went to Greece to see all these ancient sites. He was our tour guide. He's like, we've got to go there. That's where Heracles, and he knows all this stuff. And then he requested that we go to Egypt to see all the ancient sites. We had a month there. And that's his jam. Whereas my other son is more, he really, really digs the YouTubing. I'm sure that's the direction he's going to go in. He was a little bit more difficult to please in many ways, but as long as you feed them well and allow them plenty of ice cream and theme parks, they're more than happy to do anything, really. And cooking, we always did cooking classes. They both love cooking classes. So they've done cooking classes probably in about, 10 countries. They'll cook you anything. They're fantastic.
So was there kind of an interest in food from your husband, who, as you guys are going around the world, did his experience as a chef kind of influence how you guys navigated the world? Because a lot of times it's seeing things, but also, when you go around the world, Errol and I have done some traveling, and it's really just the tasting the world is really a fun thing to do. And did that play into when you guys were traveling?
I don't think my husband is more of a foodie than I am, just because he's a chef. When you say chef, people assume that you're all about creating dishes. A chef is actually more of a manager. And the head chef, not in a restaurant, possibly if you had your own restaurant, different, but he was a hotel chef. It's management, it's rosters, it's food costs, it's creating a menu that will make a profit. It's more all that stuff. I mean, he loves his food. We all love our food. But as a chef, no, I don't think that really had much play on it. Our whole family's interest in food, other than I think the boys have never had any idea that cooking was a woman's job. I don't think that's ever entered their psyche in any way. So my father's generation, my father never cooked at all. Whereas my boys they cook. My son makes bread. Which is crazy.
So as you're traveling, you said your son was influencing. We want to go to Greece. I want to go to Egypt to study these things. was that part of the calculus of how you decided where you were going to go next, and then folded in homeschooling with it? Or did you like have a family meeting, like, okay, where are we going and when are we leaving? Like, how do you, I feel like when the world is open to you, there's so many possibilities. How do you decide how long to stay, where to go, what to do? I would be just paralyzed by choice.
Yeah, that's my problem. I get paralyzed by choice, and I'm terrible at making decisions, which is why I have my husband, because he's very good at it. The kids, when the kids are little, when they're like, we left here, Australia, when they were 6 and 8. At that point, if I'd have said to them, "Where do you want to go, kids?" they would have had no clue, because they had no idea of where anywhere was like, other than where they'd been already, which was London, Australia. They'd been to Thailand, a few places in Europe and America. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't have been able to say, "Oh, I want to go to China," because they really had no concept of China. And this is another thing I find a bit frustrating with some people, that, "Oh, you must get the kids in the planning process." The kids have got no clue until they've experienced something of that place for themselves, be it through reading or a movie or a story, or they have to develop some sort of interest. And then you've got the other constraints or parameters or whatever of how much is it going to cost to get there? How actually feasible is it to travel around that country on a fairly tight budget at the beginning? That got higher. How easy is it to get visas? How close are we to that country at the moment? What time of year is it in that country? Is that country having a civil war at the moment? Do we have the correct vaccinations to get across the border? All these things the kids really have no concept of. But what we sort of drifted into was we just go wherever was convenient. I mean, my husband and I had a sort of checklist of places we wanted them to see. So obviously we wanted them to see, say, Angkor Wat, the Grand Palace in Bangkok, Sri Lanka. We're very fond of Sri Lanka, very fond of Vietnam. Definitely wanted to take them around India, Nepal, all these places we knew we had to take them, but we did them at a time where it suited us, where it was convenient, where it was affordable, in that it was a short hot flight that cost us not much. Right? We wouldn't fly around the world and then back again. We do it in some sort of order that made sense. So at one point we ended up in a little village in the far north of Romania, and we were there on and off actually for 3 years, which totally came about by chance, because we were in India and our visa was about to expire. We had to get out of India. And our ticket out of India was actually to Kathmandu, and the flight was the day after the earthquake in Kathmandu. Oh. So the airport was shut, the flight was cancelled. Luckily, we got our refund, but we're left with, like, what do we do? We've got to get out of India. So what we did was we actually flew back to London, where we went and stayed with really good friends of ours who are also homeschoolers. And just so by some miracle, we had this email from this guy in Romania saying, "Will you come to Romania? I want you to help me promote my business in Romania." He had a hotel and he had a thing called Working Travel. It's a bit like Workaway. So he invited us to Romania, and we were like, "Oh, Dracula, bears, kids would like that." So yeah, we went to far north Romania, and we ended up staying there for 3 years, on and off. We rented a little farm cottage. It was the most beautiful old place.
Wow.
And it was so cheap. We could afford to rent that year round. And we'd spend our winters there skiing just up the road. And they have all these wonderful traditions in Romania. It's like the land where time stood still. And then from there, Romania is actually quite a good base for hopping to Asia or Europe or the Middle East. It's kind of in a really good location. It's very cheap, for instance, to fly from Bucharest to Dubai. And from Dubai, you can get to Kathmandu, Bangkok, Sri Lanka, London. It's a nice central sort of place to be. So yeah, while we were there, we'd plot these, we'd go off for maybe 3 months, 6 months. So say we wanted to go to Nepal, we'd go for 3 months because the visa was 3 months. Same with Vietnam, the visa is 3 months, so we'd stay 3 months. If we wanted to go back into the country, we'd go out. At one point we were in Vietnam for 3 months, then we went to Singapore for Christmas, then we went back to Vietnam for another 3 months because we could renew the visa that way. And we'd kind of got our feet under the table, lovely little town called Hoi An. We'd kind of made friends there with some expats and some other traveling families. So we went back there for another 3 months and hung out. We did whatever suited us. So you end up in somewhere like Nepal, you've got a 3-month visa. The Everest trek we took 3 weeks over it. We took it nice and slow. And then you travel around Nepal for the remaining time and just do whatever you want to do. And then towards the end of that 3 months, you think about, well, where should we go next? What's easy? What's affordable? just do it like that. We made it up as we went along. There was never any plan.
Wow.
How much concern while you're traveling, you're kind of going to new places, safety, you have your children, the language is different, did a lot of complications play in, and how did you guys, work through that, or is my question off base from the start?
No, well, yes. I mean, I suffer quite badly from anxiety sometimes. Mm-hmm. And there was those nights where I lay in bed worrying, particularly when we were in Nepal and the whole hotel was shaking with the aftershocks. That was like a year later. That was a year after the big one. And everything was tumbling down. There was no clean water. The kids were sick, not badly sick, thankfully. I do worry about stuff, but we toned it down significantly to the first time my husband and I did it. The first time we did it, we'd happily travel on the roof of a bus around India. We'd take every risk going. Obviously, with the kids, you are much more cautious. And when we check in, before we agree to buy nights in a hotel or guest house or whatever, I'll look at it and I'll look for every possible hazard. Because when my elder one, I think he was 2, and we were staying in a hotel in Sydney, it was a nice hotel, a 5-star, and he was just toddling and he pulled himself up on a glass-topped side table, like a bedside table, and the glass wasn't attached and it slid off and it hit him in the face. Now, luckily he wasn't hurt, but you wouldn't expect that in a 5-star hotel, something that dangerous. So when we're staying in little guest houses that could be as cheap as $12 a night, I go in there first and I look for any possible hazard. It might be a hard step they could bump their heads on, or a window they could fall out of, or somewhere where mosquitoes could get in, or anything like that. I do a mummy risk assessment before I agree to put my kids anywhere. And I'm really, really much more cautious with that than anyone else I know.
Yeah, Ariel and I ran into that when we were in Barcelona when our year and a half year old discovered the bidet. We almost drowned.
Oh,
it's kind of like a reverse danger.
There were also some very low things in the hotel that were just right at toddler level. We totally agree. Very surprised.
Very surprising
that they would be there. So yeah, we can totally. So when you do that, you do your risk assessment, and then did you try to modify things, or just say, nope, you're not staying here? It's hard. No, you just arrived and you're in a new country without speaking the language. And
well, you say about speaking the language. We've never encountered a language barrier anywhere other than in the village in Romania, because it was mostly old people. All the young people speak English in Romania, but in the village it was just the old folks doing the farming. And we've never, ever encountered a language barrier anywhere. Everyone speaks English, other than probably the parts of the world that Americans visit the most, which is Central and South America, where the common language is Spanish, not English. Yep. And there, yes, you will need to learn a bit of Spanish. But this side of the world, Asia, Australia, Europe, English is fine everywhere, I think. Yeah. Oh, China. China was fun with English. We had to use a phrase, but that was 20 odd years ago. And I think today it would be very different. I think today a lot of people in China would speak English. But the first time we went, we were like pointing to words in phrase books, chicken. And they literally bought a whole chicken with the head on. Yeah.
So you talked about, you've got these, you obviously have your technology that you're traveling with, so you're homeschooling with that. And then you have these workbooks, and you're talking about your son who reads a lot. I'm seeing in my mind, like, you're traveling from place to place and you have these books. Like, I know this is probably a very silly question, but the mom in me wants to know, like, how did you get that shipped? Like, you can't just go to a store in Vietnam and buy Percy Jackson. Like, how do you get that stuff so Kindle. That you can keep homeschooling?
Okay.
Amazon, Kindle. Easy.
The digital route. You keep Did
you ever have to do physical workbooks? Did you ever have to?
Yes. No. Physical. So with physical workbooks, we took a couple with us from Australia. Okay. I remember we managed to buy some in Sri Lanka that were in English, because the kids there do school in English. And then we're in London within months. So I bought a few more. And we were actually in London for 10 months. So we probably bought quite a lot in that period. Gotcha. And then the next time we took off, we would have just taken a couple with us. And there's always Amazon. In most places, there's Amazon. But it was always, we were dipping back to London often. We'd be in London most summers, and we'd grab something there if we felt we needed to. As they got older, I mean, once they're writing and reading, you don't need to do that anymore. This is just when they're beginning, when they're practicing how to hold a pen and, write things. Once they're older, you don't need to do that at all. They just had a notebook, and they still hated writing. I told you before they hated writing. They hated writing until probably about 2 years ago. And then my son, because my eldest son then discovered that he needed to write, he started writing, and he doesn't even think twice about it now. But back then, when it was something that you had to force, and he didn't see the point, and he didn't want to do it, and why do I have to do that, Mum? He just did not see the point, and he didn't want to do it, and he didn't, mostly, other than when I made him do a workbook. But you've got to make those fun. You've got to say, right, let's do this. This is going to be awesome, and we'll do some colouring, and here's some chocolate for afterwards. You've got to make it fun. Because, my kids, neither of them ever wanted to write anything. They'll type, and they both taught themselves to touch type probably about 8-10 years old. I can't touch type. I make a living writing for the internet, and I cannot touch type. I type with one finger. But they both touch type. They just taught themselves. They used something like, is it Leap Mat or Dance Mat, something like that? It's an online app thing that is on the computer. They taught themselves to touch type.
Interesting.
Because they needed to.
Yeah. Like I don't think I ever learned how to use 10-finger typing until I got to college, when we were doing AOL Instant Messenger.
Then
and it was like a requirement.
You had to.
You got to somehow up your word count.
So we didn't have computers when I was a kid. Not even in university. Right. We did not have computers. Yeah.
So you're traveling, you're popping back and forth to the UK, so you're able to get some materials there, and then you're planning these trips that are, convenient, but also there's something to learn. So let's say you're planning your next location. Do you research beforehand and say, like, okay, here's what we're going to do, and here's some things I especially want them to learn? And like, before you go to Egypt, are you studying ancient Egypt and then going and learning that? Or is it more like ad hoc, like we're going to arrive and then we're going to see what we can do and see what we can see? Or are you planning a lot of it in advance and trying to kind of like line it up for these educational opportunities?
Well, I think that there's no point in taking kids to a place that they know absolutely nothing about, because they won't really be interested. I think you've got to spark some interest before you go. So before we go anywhere, any country or any destination, I try and bring up the subject, if you like. So before we went to Vietnam, we started looking at movies about Vietnam, the Vietnam War specifically. That was the big chunk of history that I wanted them to get out of that. And interestingly, the Vietnam War was on my son's history A-level, which he absolutely nailed. So we went to all the war sites, the tunnels and the rock pile and the DMZ, and we did all that. But before we went, they were older. Obviously, I'm not going to do that with little kids. It was pretty harrowing. We watched some of the Vietnam movies. We found some stuff on YouTube. I remember before we went to Everest, we did a lot of stuff on acclimatization and the physiology of acclimatization and why there's less oxygen up there. So that's physics. And then as you walk, you go even deeper into that, and you look at what they're growing and why are they growing that, and why do they only eat potatoes up here, and how do they get meat up here, and why do these people look Tibetan? Because they are Tibetan, but they migrated over the Himalayas and now they're the Sherpas. All that stuff, some of the detail comes as you travel, but before we go somewhere, we try and get the big ideas in there. So with Egypt and Greece, it came naturally through the boys' interest in those subjects. I think all kids are interested in that, aren't they? Is that just my kids?
No, ours are too.
Ours are as well.
Yeah. It's fabulous for them to learn about that stuff. Yeah, that was very much driven by their interest and seeing all the ancient sites. Some people would go to Egypt and just go to the Red Sea and sit on a beach, and none of us have got any interest whatsoever in doing that. We did go to the Red Sea to see what it was like. We were there 2 days. We just wanted to see what it was like there, and then we left and we went back to Alexandria, because that's where one of the 7 wonders of the world was, and that's much more cool. So we don't go to Thailand and go to the beach particularly. We go to Thailand because we want to see the ancient cities and the
temples and all that stuff.
The Khmer stuff, because it used to be the Khmers that made Angkor Wat. They also built stuff in Thailand and Vietnam, and we talked about the migration of peoples and how the language and the cuisine and everything, and how the borders have moved over time, and French Indochina and Pol Pot, and it just gives a really good world understanding, I think, to actually see it on the ground and be able to go. So if somebody says to my kids now, something about anywhere, they'll say, oh yeah, I've been there, I remember that. And another subject that came up in English literature for both boys they did some of the war poets, the World War I, World War II war poets, Wilfred Owen, people like that. And they've been to the Somme, they've stood in the trenches on the Somme, they know what it's like there, they know where it is. A lot of people don't. Just stuff like that. it's like building blocks. You just build stuff up, and it builds and builds and builds, and they just get there eventually. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it puts a big picture together, I think.
I had a question now that you've done it so long, and is a little off on our normal question route, but something that interests me. A lot of times, people who move a lot eventually say, I want to find a house and sit down and not move, and I want to have somewhere that I can sow my roots. Do you find with your kids that because they've been everywhere, they're kind of interested in just being in one place? Have they burned out on the interest of traveling now that they're older, or are they like, no, I got to go and travel more because that's just what I do? Have you noticed some weird thing about that?
I think they're pretty much happy with whatever life throws at them. If I were to, I know because I have asked them, do you want to travel? Yes. But it's not like a burning urge, like I have to travel. Mm-hmm. If we have the opportunity, then yes, we will. I mean, we're planning a few trips this year. But they're also very happy just doing our little thing here. They're perfectly happy to do that. And we gave them the option of, right, so where do you want to live? Because of the lockdowns and everything, we were stuck here in Australia. Where do you want to live? So the options were really the UK, Romania, somewhere in Asia, or here. And they really didn't mind. They really weren't all that bothered. They tended towards the UK or Romania because they both like cold winters. And obviously that's not something we get a lot of here. But we ended up staying here for financial reasons. It was just too expensive to move back. And by that time we had some pets, and we just didn't think it was fair to put the pets on the plane and shift them all the way back because they could die and stuff like that. So we ended up staying here. And I think they're perfectly happy with this. I mean, we bought a farm. I don't think we've mentioned that. We bought a farm earlier this year. We've got 5 acres. And again, it's a complete change. It's something completely different in our lives. It's a completely different way of being, of living. Mm-hmm. A whole bunch of new skills to learn. So even though the kids are now officially beyond school age, they're learning all sorts of cool stuff. Like we didn't know how to bottle feed lambs until a couple of weeks ago. We didn't know so many things that we're learning about, permaculture and animal husbandry. And, we've got a horse and we've got ducks and geese and guinea fowl. And it's a whole new set of stuff they're learning. And I think that's a really cool thing in life, is to try lots and lots of different things. And eventually you'll find one that you really like. And I'm quite lucky in that I actually like the farm and I like the traveling. And I think the kids are the same. I think the kids are pretty much happy with, whatever, as long as we weren't in a conventional setup as we were, where dad was at work all the time, mum was at work, all that sort of stuff. I don't think that would float their boats. But doing things a little bit differently, a little bit off the wall, I think suits us all much better. And at the moment we've managed to sort of piece our life together so that we all get to do what we enjoy. So I enjoy growing vegetables and fruit. My husband loves looking after the livestock. The kids love the animals as well. My husband's got casual work. He works out on the Great Barrier Reef helping kids find Nemo. He loves it. At the moment he's off volunteering. My eldest son is off volunteering as well. They're doing a week picking up trash off the beaches at far north up here. And that's fantastic for them as well. I mean, how much he's done that since he was 4. Not while we were traveling, but when he was 4, he did it. He's been doing it the last 2-3 years as well. He's learning so much. It's not just picking up the trash. They're putting it into a database and they're trying to find out where this trash actually originates from. They look at the currents and they look at any little markings on the plastics to see, what country did this come from? He's working with the Aboriginal elders up there. He's working with marine biologists. He's working with all these conservation-minded people, plus a whole bunch of volunteers. Plus they're doing all the food for a large group of volunteers and the logistics of driving there and buses and trucks. It's a whole new set of learning. And again, it's just something different from which they can learn. Because if they've just been in this one environment their whole lives, I feel like half of their knowledge would be missing, if you know what I mean. So
a lot of what you're describing is like this intrinsic motivation, the desire to learn and the things around and experience. You referenced earlier that you did homeschooling, but you also threw in the word of unschooling. And it seems like you've taken a lot of those unschooling principles and kind of applied them to your entire life, whether not just for your children, but it sounds like for you yourself and your husband as well. Was that a big kind of change in your methodology over time as you guys were world schooling? Or has unschooling always been kind of a thing in the background for you?
Well, I didn't know what unschooling was until I was probably a year or two into this, education outside school. I'd never heard of it, education outside school. I kind of decided, right, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do unschooling. And unschooling has to be completely child-led. So for a while we tried it. It didn't really sit right with us because they would literally play Minecraft all day. All day. And if I was going to leave them to be child-led, that was what was going to happen. So that kind of, that really didn't really suit the way our family vibe. It might just be my kids that want to play Minecraft. They say that they play Minecraft all day and then they get sick of it and start doing other things, but I could not see any sign of that ever happening.
We have heard that. We've heard that exact line multiple times. They're just going to get bored with it. Trust us. And it's like 3 years later.
Yeah, they're still not bored with it.
No, they just rebuilt the Vatican in Minecraft. It's been 3 years.
Yes. Well, one of our friends who is unschooled, he's building a Minecraft server at the moment. He's 18. So that's cool. Maybe that'll, be his future. So I've got nothing against it. It's just, I don't think for us, it was really what we wanted to do. And I was never going to say, right, we're just going to sit here in London and you kids can decide what we're going to do because that's child-led. I was going to say, right, we are now going to go to Nepal and you are going to go to Everest Base Camp because it'll be good for you. So I did, I took the reins. They didn't decide to do all this stuff by themselves. But we did have this rule that every year for their birthdays, they could choose where they wanted to go. And this is where they chose Greece and Egypt. And actually the third place they chose was Scotland, which was really interesting. I had no particular desire to go to Scotland, but that was what they chose. I'm not really sure why. I think they just had this romantic idea about kilts and bagpipes and stuff.
They're from Australia. They saw Mel on the screen.
They're Welsh. They identify as Welsh.
I had a question. So we've got people listening. They have young kids, and going and selling most of your stuff and then going around the world is a big thing. A question that we have is, we want to get out, we want to see more stuff. And sometimes maybe that's not going to other countries or going to the other side of the world, but maybe that's going across your state or going to a neighboring state. Do you have any advice as a world traveler to help people make those decisions, how to do it in the best way? Is there a methodology you have that you can impart to them? How can they save money? Because money tends to be the biggest issue with traveling. And, one of the big things that's come out of the pandemic is the fact that a lot of people can work from a distance now, so that they have this, the back of their minds, Ariel and I have talked about is, what if we spend a month here or a month here? Is that something we can do now? Do you have any wisdom that you can impart onto those people who are holding the bag? It's not filled. There's no diapers in it, but they want to go. They want to do it.
Well, my way to do it, which is different to many people's way, is to be as busy as possible. Okay. Because I think it's what's called slow travel. It works out that you get more travel for your dollar in terms of time in a place, but you don't get as many experiences because you're just sitting still living life, which we have done. I said before, we spent a month in Antigua, we spent 6 months in Vietnam. If you're sitting in one place, the first few days you might see all the cool things to see. And then you just get deeper and deeper into hanging out with the expats and the travelers and finding out where the markets are and discovering all the restaurants. You don't really have an awful lot to do after those first few days you've been sightseeing and you've been swimming, you've climbed that mountain, you've taken the cooking class. Now what you're going to do for the rest of the month. And I think kids get bored. I think this is where people run into difficulties with, my child's bored, we need to find friends for them, we need to find groups to go and socialise and hang out. And I think the kids get bored because they're not doing anything. So this was why we kept moving pretty fast. We did all the good stuff and then we moved on. Okay. Other than in places where we just felt really comfortable to just be and we didn't get bored. So we could spend months in London, because you can see something different in London every day. There's just so much in London, it's ridiculous. And we had a lot of friends there as well, so that does make it easier. But in places where you don't have a social group, you've got to keep busy, because otherwise you're just going to be staring at the walls. So my way of doing it, which a lot of people disagree with, is we go fairly fast and hard, and we see all the stuff. So, activities, sightseeing, the things you do in the place, we do them. we also do a lot of the wandering around, exploring, looking at this, looking at that, looking where the local people. We're not just going to the tourist spots. We're exploring everything else as well. But once you get past the point of things being new and interesting and different, I think I get bored. I know the kids get bored. And what you end up doing then is just sitting in the house. And then you start doing some more formal homeschooling, or you start watching movies, or you start playing computer games all day, or whatever. So I would prefer to be busy.
So in keeping that in your mind, being busy and being active and moving a lot, how do you balance the kids socializing and seeing people and seeing other kids and things of that nature?
There's people all around you every day. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're kept in a box as they are in school. Every day you're talking to the woman in the restaurant, or the person sitting next to you on the bus, or whatever. We were never ones to search out same age kids. That was never part of our agenda. We never did that. The kids didn't want to do that. On the rare occasion when it did happen, they felt kind of it was forced, and kind of they'd all been thrown together and now you must get on. And they were like, oh, I don't really want to do this. They didn't enjoy that. I don't enjoy that. We did meet a few people by chance that, in the normal way that people meet people, that became great friends. But for a family to make friends with another family, the whole family has to click. And that's a really rare thing, I think. So I can only think of maybe 2 or 3 families that we became good friends with, and we've stayed good friends with, because all 4 of us, it was all families of 4 coincidentally, all 4 of us really did get on and enjoyed spending time together. That is really rare, I think. One's in London, one is still traveling, actually.
Very cool.
And then the kids have got a lot of online interaction as well. So if they've made a friend in Thailand and we're now in Cambodia, they're still chatting to that friend on whatever Instagram. They seem to talk to people the most as they got older, not when they were little. Instagram seems to be how they chat, or Discord, they chat to people. They were also in a thing called Minecraft Homeschool. Have you come across that? It used to be called Minecraft Homeschool. It's called something else now. But that was, yeah.
No, I think I've heard of it. Yeah, I think it was mentioned on another interview that we had with specifically about Minecraft.
Yeah, it's changed names now. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. It's when they were quite small. So when we were in Romania in those long winters, they were doing the Minecraft homeschool at that point, and I was always hearing, the house was always filled with all these little voices, and it was mostly Americans, all playing this Minecraft server thing that they were doing. There was little educational things in it. It was quite cool. Stuff like that. They're always hanging out with people online. Still today, most of their social interaction is online. My elder son actually has a job, so he's out a few days a week, part-time. And then we're not really very sociable people, if I'm going to be honest. We're at least 3 of us are introverts, and we like our own space. Not really one to want to go partying or anything like that. Not really our jam. So we were just happy doing our thing, doing things because we enjoyed them, not because we never needed a group to go anywhere. Yep. On the rare occasion where we did go somewhere with a group, we kind of found it annoying because we had to do things that the way other people wanted to do things, if you know what I mean. So we did actually, my son and I actually did a group tour recently. We did a group tour to Bhutan. It was only a small group, about 12 of us. And we were so used to independent travel that being with a group, we found it really quite frustrating. It was pleasant socially. If some of them were nice and we got on really well with some of them, others were not. They were really annoying, didn't like being around them. And we had to not travel the way we wanted to travel because we were waiting for somebody else to go shopping or something, and we found that quite annoying. But being Bhutan, you've got to go with a group. It's very difficult to go to Bhutan. You have to have a guide and a tour. So that was the best possible, that was the way we were going to have to see Bhutan. We're just not like that. We're not really looking for much social interaction, to be honest. I mean, if we were on, say, a beach and the kids were running around in the evening, we'd normally be sitting at a restaurant in the evening having dinner and the kids would be running around. If there were some other kids, they'd probably join in a game of football or whatever. But that's not making friends. That's just hanging out with somebody for a few hours because the next day we're gone. You don't make friends unless you're with somebody for weeks or months usually, and that's the way we came to be friends with these families I've mentioned. We just happened to be in the same place for quite an extended period, and long enough to get to know each other, because you don't make friends on the spot like that, do you? But it wasn't an issue.
Our kids, my 6-year-old can, find somebody and say, this is my best friend.
She can.
She's my favorite person ever. And we say, oh, what's her name? I don't know.
Yeah.
So you've done all the traveling, and now you've had to come back and set these roots down. And I'm really curious about what that adjustment was like for your kids. Were they able to, kind of settle right back into being in one place? And, you said your older son has a job. How did they adjust to kind of quitting the nomadic lifestyle and being rooted and all of that? Was that easy, hard for them, or?
They were much better than me. I was in bits. I absolutely hated it. I never wanted to come back here, and to come back here and then have the gate slam behind us and know you're not getting out for 2 years. That was horrendous. The kids were fine because they came back. They didn't feel as if they were coming back to anything because they didn't really remember the before.
Yeah.
Really, because we left when they were 6 and 8. They didn't really remember much of it. They remembered the house. There was nothing really that they were coming back to. So it was like building a new life again. We had to buy them all new bedroom furniture. We bought them all new computers, which they were thrilled with because they'd never had a big computer setup. I'm sitting here in my son's, he's got the full YouTubing thing with 2 screens, and absolutely thrilled with all that, desks and chairs, and they loved all that. First time they'd ever had their own bedroom. They were absolutely fine. I don't think they really missed the travel particularly because they were just so thrilled to have more time to spend online rather than mum dragging them up a mountain every 5 minutes. But we were confined to the house at first because it wasn't a massively hard lockdown, but we weren't allowed to go more than 5 kilometers.
Yeah.
We'd go out on our bikes once a day, and that was about it. And we were just bored because we were so used to their education coming mostly from being really, really active and doing things and experiencing things. And all of a sudden we're staring at 4 walls. And that was the point at which I thought, right, I'm going to put you in an online school just to have some interaction with other humans, which actually I wasn't thrilled with the online school. It wasn't fantastic, but it was a great learning experience for them in that they had these fantastic relationships with their teachers. Their teachers were usually fairly young. That really makes a difference. Don't think it really does because some of their best friends are older than me. So they were usually in really small groups. So my eldest son was 1-to-1 with his history and English literature teacher for 2 or 3 years, and they had this really amazing relationship. They got on really well. They were both total history nerds. Her degree was actually in ancient history. She loved ancient Egypt. So they just nerded out together, and he finished off the last year of his A-levels. He was making a Viking sword. He built himself a forge out here, and his history project was to make a Viking dagger using materials and equipment that was relevant to the era. And he researched this dagger, and that was a whole term of history A-level with his teacher, who was thrilled by this because she does all the medieval recreation battle type stuff. She loved all this stuff, and so did he, and they were so excited, and he got to build a forge. But what sparked that, I think, was when we were in Nepal. He did a class with a local craftsman, and he made a Nepali gurkha knife for cookery with very simple tools. It was just in this old guy's back garden. He hammered it, and he made this amazing knife. But that kind of sparked that idea, which he took then into his history. And I've forgotten what we were talking about. We were talking about adapting back to normal life. Yeah. They were fine. I felt like I was just trapped in a box with my wings clipped. And it wasn't just that. It was the fact that the global situation destroyed my business. Within that January, February, March, I just got down to about 20% of my normal income. So my income was gone. My business was destroyed. I was away from my family. My mother was very sick. I couldn't go home. I couldn't be me anymore. Whereas the kids were fine. They didn't care. They were absolutely fine. And because of the situation with this, we've got no workers anywhere in the world. He just fell into a job really easily. He really enjoys it. He's doing it for fun, really, and for a little bit of a social outlet, a little bit of a break, a couple of days a week. He's also got his volunteering. He loves doing his volunteering. I would hate it because it's all camping and won't be doing that, snakes. He loves it. And the other one is more than happy doing his YouTubing and looking after his cats. And then we're getting a puppy next week, which I'm quite excited about. So no, it's all good, really.
So, as an introvert, and you have your own space now and everything, we thank you for welcoming us into your space and talking about this. Can you tell us a little bit more about your digital space that you've been maintaining for years?
Oh, well, the big website is called World Travel Family. I say that slowly because people never hear me. World Travel Family.
We'll put it in the show notes too.
It's worldtravelfamily.com. There are other pirated versions around. The only one that is actually mine is the .com, which is really frustrating, but people copy websites in their entirety. They just steal them. And I know there's several versions floating around the internet at the moment, which I'm trying to get taken down. But if it's .com, it's mine. We also have one called Homeschool Group Hug. We have one called Tropical Food Garden, which is about the farming project here and gardening and permaculture, how to grow stuff. We have World Travel Chef. We have quite a lot of websites, but the big one is World Travel Family. That's the one that's funded us as we've travelled, basically. And it covers most of the places we've been, travel tips, how-tos, a lot of stuff on Worldschooling, homeschooling as you travel. And there's also a lot of information on blogging, how to become a blogger, how to make money as a blogger, technical stuff, SEO and things like that. So that's all on World Travel Family. We're on Instagram and all the socials, but we don't really bother with those very much anymore. It's not really what I like to do. It's mostly about the website. We don't do YouTube. That's it. I've been building that for the last, I think, 11 years. It's a very large website.
So if families want to get out and travel more, or maybe even do a gap year or something and travel around the world, then they can come to your site and you'll give them your tips and tricks and where to go in certain countries. Is that the kind of information they can expect?
Absolutely. So if you just search World Travel Family, you can search it as 3 words or 3 words shoved together, one long word. World Travel Family, Family Gap Year. We've actually got 4 or 5 posts just about family gap years. And that will take you off to other posts about particular destinations, particular countries, how to, plan the routes and money and all these different details are on there. We don't have much coverage of Central and South America, only I think El Salvador and Guatemala, but we've got a lot of Asia. We're very Asia heavy and a fair bit of Europe. But and a lot of London, obviously, because that's where we lived for a lot of time. It's my baby. It's the 3rd child, and it's what pays the bills. It's back up to about 50% of normal now as the travel is coming back in. Good. It's starting to come back up. Finally, yay!
Yeah, I know.
Well, you're definitely giving me the travel itch just by talking about it.
I hope so. I do hope so.
Well, thank you just so much for joining us and inviting us in and letting us know about your Worldschooling adventures. I think it's fascinating, and it's something that I think it seems so unattainable to just read about it, but to hear you talk about it and in the practical terms and in all of the wonderful experiences that your children had, I just think it's neat. It's just really, really great to hear from the ground. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I like to talk. I may be an introvert, but I do like to talk.
Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!